I'm Tim, and I'm honored to be here with Neumann Monson Architects, but I'm here to tell the story of our succession plan. Now, it's a succession plan that has deepened our entire team's commitment, engagement, and alignment around our mission to drive positive change. And our team of 40, they believe architecture has the power to cultivate communities, preserve our natural resources, and strengthen organizational cultures. And with a 45-year history in Iowa, we're on our third generation of leadership, which is our first non-founder generation of leaders. Now, today I'm going to speak as much to the development of our succession plan as I do the organizational transformation that made it possible. But first, why tell this story? Now, the word is that professional services firms of all disciplines struggle with succession, especially as the baby boomer generation retires. Is that right? I think it is, isn't it? Well, Sullivan? It is, okay. Well, good, then this may be relevant. So, for us, the goal is to create an impactful and long-lasting legacy, not for any one individual, but for the collective. And with that in mind, we set out to take ownership of the future. And last year, we fleshed out the details of our plan, but it wasn't hatched overnight. A decade of incremental change and cultural shifts made it possible. But the catalyst was our first ever all-staff retreat in 2012. And in that open forum, it became very clear that we had a significant gap in mindset and priorities between owners and staff. A gap wide enough to threaten our future. And if we didn't act, we stood to lose much of our young talent. At the time, ownership and decision-making was very tightly held, and that drove down decision-making, or not decision-making, but shared trust and engagement. Now, from top to bottom at that time, we were reactive, not proactive. And as a principal, I was part of the problem, having passively chosen for years to preserve the status quo. But my call to action came a few months after that first retreat as several individuals, frustrated with leadership's lack of action, threatened to leave. Now, as I tried to convince them to stay, one exclaimed, "You're not capable of change." So that individual did leave. But thankfully, that comment shifted my focus toward creating a better environment for the individuals that did stay. And together we have proved that we have been capable of change. Now, awards aren't everything, right? But they can be a measure of change and trajectory. And this firm has gone from receiving its first ever award for design excellence at the state level in 2003, that was my career goal coming out of college, to a firm that has doubled the success rate of all other firms in the state and the 5-state region over the past decade. On top of that, this little firm in Iowa has received a distinguished honor nationally for design each of the past 4 years. It's pretty good. But there's no coincidence that our employee experience and client experience efforts have also garnered a good amount of recognition. So 2021 was a little off the mark, but 2022 is just out of the gates. So enough about awards. How did we change? To break from our 2012 paradigm, our principals needed to shift from a mindset of power and control, forcing outcomes and decisions top down, to a mindset of vulnerability and humility, inviting that next generation to step up and take ownership of outcomes. Essentially, we stopped complaining about generational differences and we started leveraging them. We stopped ignoring and stifling ideas for change, and we started prioritizing constant evolution. But most importantly, we stopped doubting in our team's capabilities and we put our trust and faith in them. We invested in them, which set the stage for their success. Of course, this didn't happen overnight. It took a little time, and here's how 2 key themes played out. The facilitator of our first all-staff retreat wisely suggested that a cross-section of our team plan that event, something completely foreign to our culture at the time because principals planned everything. Now, as that planning team started the effort, they were so disempowered, they were afraid to make decisions. But they did it. They made it through, and we gave them space to trust in their instincts. Now, ultimately, that event was well planned, and it opened the door to change. And as principals, we just started to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. But the staff was beginning to learn how to step up and take ownership of their future. As they felt more and more empowered, it opened the door to an array of grassroots staff-led initiatives that disrupted the status quo. And now we have several strategic teams that offer most of our staff the opportunity to engage in not just their own project success, but in every project success, as well as the constant evolution of our processes. Now, these cross-sectional teams have become the go-to methodology for short-term initiatives and challenges like navigating COVID, or achieving our JUST certification, or now we're trying to create a system where new grads can envision their whole career path in front of them. Now, we're in a different place, authentic to our shared values. Project teams are strengths-based and agile, not in siloed fixed studios. Decision-making is decentralized across these strategic teams, which engage anyone that wants to be engaged in them, no matter their experience level. Ownership has grown to nearly half of our staff as it's been offered to those who have earned the trust of their colleagues. And with that gap between owners and staff bridged, we're aligned around our mission and collaborating to design our future. Now, it's worth noting that throughout this great resignation, we've retained all of our experienced staff. Now, theme 2. Input at that first retreat made it clear that much of our team had felt no connection or responsibility to our clients or our firm's financial success, for that matter. So to broaden everyone's perspective, the alignment's wrong. So these did look a little better before, but to broaden everyone's perspective, we made project financials transparent and trained staff to manage resources and clients. We transitioned our retirement plan to a profit-sharing plan and gave quarterly reports, transparent reports on all of our ups and downs. Now, as it turns out, this kind of transparency can stir a little anxiety, especially in the downs, but as we asked if we should stop, the answer was no. You see, each of these steps helped the entire team learn that only through our collective contributions can we create holistic and shared success. So in 2015, the next step, we started broadening ownership beyond that of the principals and added a tier we called shareholders. We were hesitant to add traditional titles because we felt it was contrary to the flat, non-hierarchical culture we were trying to foster. Now, each of these shareholders was given the opportunity to buy 5 shares, about 1% of the firm, which represented an accessible level of investment for anyone in our organization. We took this step without knowing what was next, without knowing how to structure future purchases or determine future leaders. But it's worked out really well. Each of these shareholders has become incredibly skilled as mentors at fostering their teammate success and at fostering client success. Now, last year we took the next step in our planning effort, fleshed out the details, and we have plenty of time to implement this. We do have one principal of 5 that will retire in 2025. The other 4 of us are tightly grouped in age and will retire in the 2030s. At least that's the plan. Now, we asked, as we started this planning effort, for a little feedback, and we learned that title shareholder, that was not empowering at all to our future leaders. It didn't provide any sort of status externally from the client's perspective. So we introduced traditional titles with a structure of 7 principals, 7 associate principals, and 7 associates. Now, Those numbers are all flexible, but for example, we'll build up to 9 principals before the retirements in the 2030s. Now, we added these titles, but we're still very cautious about internal hierarchy. So we're very clear that while these titles add responsibility, they don't add power and control. They're to be left at the door. Now, as we went on, we established 3 goals. The first, largely financial, to establish a future unencumbered by debt to retirees. Second, we wanted to mitigate career plateaus through ongoing opportunities for growth and reward. And third, we wanted to create this virtuous and sustainable process for your advancement, one that could be transparent to our entire staff, even these new grads coming out of school that want to be able to see what their career path might be. So we also have some constants that anchor our plan. One is that our valuation formula hasn't changed for 30 years. Shares are always purchased per that valuation and never, ever, ever gifted. And if you leave before retirement, you receive back only the hard asset value of your shares, no goodwill, no exceptions. And lastly, to make sure we're always passing the baton to the next generation, you must sell all of your shares before you reach age 70. So how did we attack those goals? The first one, it was the retirement of our youngest shareholder that stretched our thinking to 40 years. And while right now we have debt to one retiree, within a decade, we're going to have an ongoing cycle of retirees at every stage of ownership, and that's going to flow right into the future owners of the organization. So it's until last year, we didn't have a grasp on the financial implications of succession. I'm embarrassed to say that we simply absorbed the impacts of purchases and retirements year to year. And these can be large sums of money. So looking ahead, while the retirement of those principals in the 2030s is a key milestone, we're soon going to have a lot more to manage. So we started mapping this out and modeling it, and to take a look at what those liabilities would be over time. And we took steps to manage what seemed like insurmountable numbers, limiting the number of shares with which one can retire, and reducing an onerous 15-year buyout period at retirement down to 7 years. And these steps significantly reduce that liability, but even a reduced liability is still a drain on your operations if you don't have the assets, or if you don't have the assets to make the payments and you don't have the assets to counterbalance liabilities on your balance sheet. So to that end, we established a trust to which the incoming funds from all share purchases are deposited, and with investment that is projected to meet the peak of liability and thereafter become a source of income for our future owners. So the second goal, we address that by defining responsibilities for each of these stages of ownership and establishing a measured pacing for the purchase of shares. Now, becoming a shareholder or owner and advancement requires an invitation, which I'll speak to in a moment, but it also requires a minimum level of ownership associated with that stage. And no titles are conveyed until the transactions are complete. So responsibilities foster firm-wide success while preparing you for the next role. And for example, in preparation for a potential role as principals, our associate principals have been given a 3-year mission to develop and implement a component of our new strategic plan. Now, the rate of purchase is defined to set expectations for current and future buyers, but also limit the opportunities for somebody that's independently wealthy to move through the system faster, or somebody that's just really ambitious and pushy. So basically you can achieve or purchase 5 shares every 5 years starting out. And however, if you're invited to the next stage of ownership, you have a one-time opportunity to buy 10 shares, and as a principal, you can buy in 10 and 15 share increments. Now, How do you make a process virtuous? It might be a little aspirational, but we know how it can happen for the wrong reasons. Favoritism, politics, or somebody just demands it. All of these can lead to a process veiled in secrecy and a lack of trust. So candidates might also ask for a checklist that's void of the qualitative human side of the equation. But we as principals feel that if we can do a good job educating our fellow shareholders on what it will take to have a holistically successful practice into the future, that we can trust the outcome to their vote. So how does one advance? Earn the trust and confidence of your colleagues. So in closing, I'm very proud of this plan that we've developed, primarily because it was a collective effort. As leaders, we loosened the reins and invited the next generation to step up and co-create a vision beyond ourselves. With the spirit of openness and experimentation, we've taken conscientious and incremental steps, not always knowing what was next, but it's worked out remarkably well. And I'm optimistic that we've instilled the importance of trust, staff empowerment, engagement, and collective success in our team, and that these principles will continue to guide our plan. However, what we've learned from our own evolution is that we must remain vigilant, that we must continue to question the status quo, even when it was once our own innovation. And that the story of this practice, learning to question, empower each other, and build trust, is key to this plan's success and longevity. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much. Tim, will you click one more time for the Q&A?
What's that?
One more click for the Q&A. There you go. All right. Questions for Tim around succession planning. So, Tim, I'll start with one. How has this impacted staff satisfaction and engagement at the company since rolling this out?
Well, I don't know. I think it's been very successful. The day after the transactions were made this year, and there were 120 some shares purchased at that point with the advancement of all of those individuals. And the day after that, we made a presentation to the entire staff, because that was really the first time we could tell the story of how succession works within our organization. And from what I know, and there could be some blind spots there, it has been successful. We should ask for feedback, though.
Very good, very good. Got some questions up here on the screen. What is the male-female ratio of owners? How does DEI fit into your long-term plan?
Yeah, that's a problem, because currently our principals are all males. But we do have, and there's a challenge in the architecture profession, because when I went to school, there were maybe 5 females for a class of 75. So we're working through the system. With our associate principals, 2 of them are females, so we're anxious to get them into the system so we're not so male-dominated. Similarly, in our recruiting efforts, there's not a lot of diversity amongst our ranks. We do have some diversity amongst our principal group, but amongst our ranks in the people that joined the team more than 10 years ago, there's not a lot of diversity. But in these last 10 years, we have 50% at least diversity and 50% at least of men, or women. Well, both.
Right. We've got time for maybe one more question. You want to pick a question from the list up here that you most want to answer, Tim?
Who decides who gets to join as a shareholder? That is a vote of all the shareholders. And for that, we don't look at the ownership levels. We're more so looking to the next generation of our owners to influence that, because they're going to be the ones, working alongside them for the longest. So it's one individual, one vote as we're looking at that. So in the mid-year, we'll talk about, like about right now, we'll talk about who we might nominate to be future owners, and then later in the year, we'll make those decisions as a group.
Right. Well, Tim, thank you very much. We appreciate it. As always, an excellent presentation by Neumann Monson Architects. Give them a hand, guys.